In fact, there's none other than him that is deserving of all of our worship and our praise. Therefore, we are glad to be in this number one more time. The first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 4. Chapter 4. For the remainder of this year, we'll be talking about putting God first. Today we talk about putting God first in worship. For Genesis 4 gives us an example of true and false worship. It tells us that everybody that comes to church don't come to worship. And so that's why you cannot emulate somebody else's behavior in church. Because you can be in the right place for the wrong reason. We find in our lesson today a story that happened after the fall of man. And our spotlight is on the two offsprings of Adam and Eve, the first two children that were born in the Bible. In the 4th chapter of the book of Genesis, the record says, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, mad, and his countenance fell. I want to talk about true worship. You may be seated. True worship today. True worship. It's our endeavor this morning to point out a few things in this passage. First of all, we'd like to point out the pattern of true worship, the place of true worship, the process, and then the plan of true worship. We got to get this now. You got to get this today, because it kind of sets the tone of what we do when we come up in here. It kind of gets us, amen, in tune. Every now and then someone needs to say something of how we ought to act when we come up in the Lord's house. Does God give us credit just for being here? Or is it the gifts that we bring that he is watching? Is God concerned with our presence or our presence? You figure that out in a minute. He says here that Adam and Eve knew each other, and they conceived and bare Cain. In the midst of disobedience, in the midst of judgment, in chapter 3, sin was introduced in the garden. In chapter 3, man fell from grace deliberately with his eyes wide